Hiya! Pre-recorded Whisper here. This is the first video I'm recording before I go on my vacation. But you guys are probably seeing it during my vacation. Today I want to talk about something a little bit different, but bear with me. I want to talk about daggers, and why the hell we have to have two of them. Now, obviously, two daggers is a staple of rogues for, forever and ever, dating back before World of Warcraft. But I have a little bit of an a little bit of a gripe, if you may, about how World of Warcraft handles two daggers and dual wielders in general. Because, example one, right here, this is best in slot from a dungeon, and the only reason it's best in slot is because of the Time Strike. A bonus cantrip, bonus effect, we call them cantrips, on this dagger that makes it better in the offhand. But it's not better in the main hand, right? It's very strange. You always want the highest item level dagger in your main hand, and your offhand dagger doesn't matter. The item level is really irrelevant, and we often take these cantrip effects instead. Why is that? Well, a long time ago, Blizzard thought, well, if we need to give them two daggers, then they need to get twice as many weapons, right? Mages can just get a staff, Boomkin's gonna get a staff, things like Arms Warrior can get a two-handed axe, two-handed sword, whatever it may be, right? Those are all things that only require one slot. Two-handed weapons, one slot. But then you have tanks, right? One hand and a shield. They need to get twice as many items for very important slots, right? Weapons, shields, these are the most important slots on your character. So the thing that Blizzard came up with, which at the time felt pretty clever, was they made stat weights on which ones are more important, right? Now this isn't, don't use this for gearing, right? Don't use it for gearing, but you can see here, my weapon DPS, my main hand weapon DPS, 1 point of it worth 90 actual DPS. So having more item level on a dagger means the DPS on this dagger goes up, and that is insanely valuable. Incredibly valuable. But you can see the offhand weapon DPS is dirt. Absolute garbage. It still does some things, but for the most part, this is completely negligible, right? The difference in 6 item levels here, you can see, is 725 to 766. That's a difference in 40 DPS, right? And so offhand weapon DPS, a difference in 40 DPS on an offhand weapon is 100 DPS, give or take, on a nearly 400,000 DPS character. Offhand weapon DPS is one of the most meaningless stats in World of Warcraft, bar none. And they did this so that you don't feel pressured to have a really good second dagger, and you don't have to farm two daggers, right? You can have your big main hand dagger with your big item level that you got from Mythic, and then your offhand can be a little bit worse. Obviously, you will want to get a second one for best in slot and all that stuff, but you aren't pressured into it so that you can keep up with two-handed users, right? And as a comparison here, this is the same dagger as this, right? 528. It's a higher item level, but it's down 0.6%, just because of the Time Strike, right? The Time Strike here makes this a 2,000 DPS difference, and the loss in item level is marginal, right? This is 2,200 DPS, and we just saw that the item level itself is only responsible for maybe 200 of them, right? So the cantrips themselves, while being not the strongest, are still crushing offhand weapon DPS. And we've seen this all over the place. We've seen this with Nick of Time, obviously, but this can confuse people as well, right? In the same patch, we also have Cruel Dreamcarver. This looks like it has an effect that does something, but this has no combat value. But people are so scared at this point of a cantrip item that if this is ever listed in the BIS, like it is right now because it gives speed, people are like, oh, I need to macro this into abilities and use this on cooldown. People macro this into their Kingsbane. It doesn't make any sense to, because it's a permanent buff that you use once. You get your speed, you get your leech, you get whatever stat, right? It's a out of it works in combat, but it's not a direct combat benefit. Speed, leech, little bit of health, right? So macroing this doesn't make any sense, but it's green text. A cantrip item, so people macro this. I see it constantly. Constantly. People macro this into their Kingsbane, thinking it does damage, without verifying or checking it at all. Because it's green text, and so it has to be better, and that's why it's BIS, end of story. Right? But we've seen this before, Shadowlands as well. We had Edge of Night. This thing was bonkers. And because of how it worked, it was better for sub, worse for assassination, but it was still BIS across the board, and having two of these was an insanely large power gain. Main hand and offhand. So we went from needing one dagger and not feeling pressured to have the other dagger to, in this patch especially, you really felt behind if you didn't have two Edge of Nights. People were wearing a mythic Edge of Night in their main hand and an LFR Edge of Night in their offhand because it was simply so strong, right? So the entire thing of Blizzard's thought process of, oh, we'll make the offhand not worth anything, doesn't work, right? It doesn't work anymore because you have stuff like this. They try to make interesting items, which is great. Interesting items, all for it. But they're so powerful that they then overwork any of the progress that Blizzard tried to make in equalizing weapons. And that, again, misleads people. This is something that does damage. Shard of Azzinoth, very famous item that does damage. The effect does damage. And you can get this from Black Temple Time Walking. And every time Time Walking comes around, like clockwork, this can drop and people go, oh, is it worth it? And the answer usually is no. Because in this case, the item level is too low for it to make sense. And this effect itself isn't really that strong when scaled up. So in general, the effect is weak. The item level is a little bit too low, so it's not worth it, even in your offhand. But because it's such a nebulous thing that isn't explained anywhere in the game, has no bearing on anything aside from just knowing that offhand DPS sucks, every single time we get questions. Is it worth it? And the weird thing about this is there's already ways that Blizzard has tried to get around it and make this a little bit less nebulous and try to make sure that people get two daggers. Case in point, there's this dagger. I believe this was from a rare in Zereth Mortis. This was an outdoor rare, but you had a two-set effect. So you would use this dagger if you managed to drop two of them, but you didn't have this problem of offhand versus main hand, right? You had the set bonus, and if you had the set bonus, you did extra damage. This is a way to get around that problem, because now you need to have both daggers, and you can gear up to it, right? You still have that whole dynamic of, okay, well, I have my main hand dagger, that's stronger, I have my offhand dagger, but once I do get this set bonus, I get something, right? It's not about how strong the weapons are anymore, it's about how strong the set itself is, right? And Shadowlands continues to have experiments like this, right? We also had these Animos Spheres. Now, if you didn't raid Castle Nathria, been a while, but Castle Nathria didn't have weapon drops. They had token drops, similar to tier set bonuses. So you can see eligible classes, right? Death Knight, Warlock, Demon Hunter. And they had two bosses that dropped weapons, and they dropped in these little tokens, and you take them to a vendor to get your weapon, right? The problem with this, however, again, is you needed two of them for for dual wield classes. Two-handers only needed one, right? This mage one, you went to your Covenant Sanctum, you traded it in for a staff. Done. The rogue one, you get one Animos Sperical, you get one dagger. So you again are stuck in this void of you're behind. Even though the numbers don't add up, the offhand being so crappy puts you behind. Like, no matter what they do. It's either behind to a cantrip, or you have to be behind in gearing. And this sucks. This sucks really bad. And it sucks not just for us. Meet Ashkander. This was from Avarus, right? From Neltharion. This is a two-handed sword with a absolutely huge, like massive cantrip effect. And now you'll see the eligible classes. Oh, maybe you won't. Now you will. Eligible classes. Guess which one got fucked over by this? Our good friend Fury Warrior, because they had to wear two of these, right? Because it was so good that it was bis for all of the two-handed classes that only wear one of them. That means it's bis for the main hand of Fury and also the offhand of Fury. So they needed to gear this twice. And this is the inherent problem. You can't make something that's so strong that it has to be worn in your main hand, because then you also need it in the offhand, at which points there's no reason for offhand damage to be so bad and so convoluted. Or you make it just weak enough to be used in the offhand, but then no one else uses it, right? If Ashkander was only worth it in the offhand, all of a sudden, Ret, Arms, and all three Death Knight specs would never use this. So for them, it has to be in a point where Fury gets the short end of the stick. Fury is always going to want two of them. But there is a solution. And in my opinion, this is the solution that Blizzard should be going towards. Because they've actually done this in the past with something that can fix it. Meet the Kingslayers. Obviously, these are our artifact weapons from Legion, right? And the interesting thing about the Legion artifact weapons is if you are a dual wield class, you only had to get one item. This is the only weapon in the game, right? Artifact weapons are the only weapons in the game that do this, but they do this. And I can actually show you, because I have them, I fished them out of my bank. And you can see when I hover this, I have two items. I have Anguish and Sorrow, and they are in the same item, right? This one weapon has Anguish and Sorrow in it. If I equip it, I actually get Anguish and Sorrow at once, right? I unequipped two daggers to equip one dagger, and I still got two back. This is, like, this technology already exists in the game. And so you can take the Kingslayers, you can take something that gives you two daggers automatically, and you can still do these spheres, right? These, in theory, were a good idea. You could pick whichever weapon you want if you wanted a different transmog, for example, or if you wanted a different secondary stat for some reason. You could use these to get a different weapon. It gave you a choice of like 3 different daggers. But you needed 2 of them still. So why don't we take the token system back and put on the technology from artifact weapons? That way, everyone gets their weapons. And you can just do away with all of the offhand shenanigans, and you could just have your 2 daggers. And now, that comes with a downside, right? We were talking about the set bonus, right? Set bonus dagger. You needed offhand and main hand in order to trigger the set bonus. You can still do that, right? You can still make exceptions, just like you did with the artifact weapons. right? If you look at the artifact weapons, you inherently know when you pick them up, this is 2 daggers, right? This is Anguish on the top, Sorrow on the bottom. You can still have cantrip items and special items that you can put in your main hand to override it, right? In my head, if I equipped the Kingslayers and then I said, "Aw, darn, I really want to equip this ornamental Draconoid Claw." Okay, well, that can still go in my offhand, right? But make everything set bonuses instead, right? If you want to wear 2 different daggers, you can, but instead of cantrip effects that force them into your offhand, make them set bonuses. That way you have to either choose to have both, right? And they drop individually, and you can choose to have both, or you can just go around wearing your regular daggers, right? But it eliminates the case where you have a dagger, and then you have a garbage dagger, comparatively, with a cantrip effect that replaces your offhand. You should only be able to have these sets of 2, right? Same thing for mages. You can have a wand, and you can have an offhand, but make that a set bonus, right? Otherwise, give them a staff. The same concept, right? This already exists. Instead of a staff, get a set bonus, offhand, and wand. Instead of 2 daggers, you make 1 dagger, and if you have an alternative with a set bonus, you can still have 2 daggers. See how that works? And in my opinion, that would be much smoother. Because right now, you got people farming a dungeon once a week that they don't want to farm. They go in, they clear the second boss, and then they leave. For anyone else in that party that wants to actually clear the whole content, they get screwed over by the rogue, because the rogue just goes in, goes to the second boss, doesn't get the dagger, goes, okay, next week, and then leaves, right? So it makes the experience bad for other players when it has to be farmed in this way. And on top of that, it just doesn't make much sense, right? Like, if you're a player that doesn't know how to simulate, that doesn't know exactly why things are the way they are and why they're good and why they're bad, you might look at a Time Strike dagger and go, okay, well, what the hell is Time Strike, right? Like, what does that do? Why is this listed as best in slot? It's just Time Strike. And then this has an actual effect, but this isn't best in slot? This doesn't do damage? How could that be, right? Less confusion, easier gearing, better ingredients, better pizza, Papa John's. Anyways, that's my rant. I hope you guys are having a good pre-patch and are hyped for the expansion release. Pre-patch isn't out yet when I'm recording this, so I don't know. But hopefully it's cool, and you guys are all having fun. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!